Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. As usual, I'm going to ask Katie what's going on in Iowa, and it's Thanksgiving in Canada, so I'm also going to ask her what she's thankful for, even though she doesn't actually have to think about that until sometime in November, whenever your Thanksgiving falls. I don't know, some random Thursday. I don't know how that works. But yeah, so Katie, what's going on in Iowa, and what are you thankful for?
American Thanksgiving is either the third Thursday in November or the last Thursday in November.
You don't even know?
Damned if I know. I don't know. It's the day before Black Friday, Arlene. That's what I need to know about it.
Yes, but which Friday is Black Friday? The third Friday or the last Friday?
The day after Thanksgiving, obviously.
Got it, yeah.
No idea. It got to be winter here, like last night, maybe. Like we were all wearing shorts on Friday, even yesterday morning, probably we were wearing shorts. And now it's like, we went to a fall festival today and I had to have the kids find like hats and mittens and jackets and things that we have not needed in 6 months.
Yeah, many months.
7 months. Yeah, it's been a while. And so, of course, we had that mad scramble of like, and granted, I don't know why this is a problem. Every year, I know it's not just our family, but every year it's like, what do you mean it will get cold? Despite having lived in this hemisphere for most of my life, it's still a surprise every year when it gets cold. And I'm like, but why is it like that?
It's when there's that sudden shift, though, right? Like where, 2 days ago it was warm and then all of a sudden it just crashes. And sometimes there's those in between days, but there doesn't seem to be sometimes a gradual shift that would make it, like every day just like a little bit easier to tolerate.
Yeah, and it's going to warm back up in a few days, but not nearly as warm as it had been, which it is. Yeah, I mean, it is the middle of October.
It is October, I guess. We'll have to prepare ourselves for that fact.
We are not starting harvest yet, although a lot of folks in our area are. We pick a lot of our corn because we feed it as ground corn, so cobs and kernels, so it needs to be drier than corn because we don't dry it, it goes into open cribs. But it is that nice time of year where you get that soothing background white noise of all the corn dryers in the neighborhood running. It's a little disconcerting when the first one starts and you realize that you're hearing a noise and you're like, what is that noise? Because like winter, it happens every year, but every year I'm like, what is that? Because it doesn't happen that much that you'd be like, oh, corn dryers. But then they start ramping up through the neighborhood, and next will be all the wood stoves ramping up. We have a lot of neighbors with outdoor wood burners or a few corn burners. So the corn dryers stop and the wood burners start.
Right, yeah. And then it's more about what's that smell?
Which is usually nice, but I feel like, yes, that first week or so that you start catching a whiff, there is a little back of the brain anxiety, I think, about like, what if somebody's house is on fire and I'm just ignoring it because I thought it was their wood burner and it's not.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah. So we have not started to harvest, but we're close. Lots of folks are going, doing the things. How are things at your place, Arlene?
Things are good. I think I mentioned last week that beans and silage are both done, so those are exciting steps. And then corn will wait a while for us too. It's not dry enough to come off for a little bit, but 2 of the 3 main harvest things on our farm are done and put away where they need to be, so that's good. And this past week, we had some people coming from Holstein, Canada to come and do some training on our farm. So it was a really good excuse to get some cleaning done And it's one of those things that probably we should just do every fall once the flies go away. It seems to be the critical step. Once the flies are gone and stop pooping on everything, then to do kind of a clean before you get into winter, because at least this time of year you can clean and your hands don't freeze. But you leave it too much longer and then cleaning because becomes much more difficult because your hands freeze and anything that you're trying to do becomes more challenging. So yeah, we did a lot of cleaning and getting stuff kind of ready for that. And not that they really cared. It wasn't like we needed to do it, but it was a good excuse to kind of work our way through the list of things that need to get tidied up. And I finally I had a couple of our storm windows because we're in an old house and two of them had cracked panes. And so I had on my list of things to do forever to go and get those fixed so that when it got cold, we could get the storm windows on. So, of course, I left it until October, and they could probably go on this week, but now I have to wait for them to get fixed. But it would be nice to have no cracks in the storm. One had a fully broken pane that had to come out, and the other one had a crack in it. So we'll get those fixed and then get the storm windows on the house so things are cozy in here. The heat has been on for a few days because it got cold here as well. And oh, you forgot to say what you're thankful for, Katie. I was going to say, it's Thanksgiving. So you had time to think about it. What are you thankful for today?
I'm thankful that more of our community events this week were to celebrate happy things than to mourn sad ones, because we had both this week. But we had a wedding in the neighborhood last night, and that was fun. And I got to see my friend Susie's new baby, who just got home from a few weeks in the NICU, but he is growing really well. And he's super damn cute. And he's still at that cute newborn stage where they just sleep and you can just like snuggle them. And of course, the best part about it not being my child is that when it poops, I don't have to deal with it. And I'm not the one waking up in the middle of the night, which is pretty awesome. And it's great to have him home. What are you thankful for, Arlene?
Well, I mean, all the usual stuff, but in the more trivial, I'm going to say that I'm thankful for the fact that both of our families don't live very far away. And I know that not everyone is that lucky, and maybe some people want to be far from their families. I don't know. But I am thankful for the fact that on a long weekend, we get from Saturday, Sunday, Monday for Thanksgiving weekend, that on a long weekend, we can fit in gatherings with both families and not have to do much travel. And as farming goes, right, still fit in chores in between times, because it would definitely make things more complicated if we had to hire people to do chores and do long trips. But this way we can fit in both sides of the family and still milk cows in between. So that is something that I'm thankful for. And every year I'm thankful for the leaves changing, because it's just, I mean, you see it every year. It shouldn't be, same as Katie said earlier. It's not like it's surprising, but there's just something so pretty about the fact that we get to live in a place with seasons, and that the changing colors of the leaves is such a cool thing to experience every season. So I'm thankful for that today. And also thankful that my daughter gets to come home again for a few days. So we're recording this on Sunday, and she's on her way home now because, of course, she had to fit in another cow show. So this one was a little further from home. It's now closer to where her calf is now living. So she'll be home soon, and we get to spend a few days with her. So that'll be nice too.
Speaking of daughters, Arlene, since these updates come out in a more timely fashion than our episodes necessarily do, my almost 8-year-old daughter has some very strong feelings about the lack of appropriately spooky Halloween decorations around our home. And I got treated to quite a diatribe about pumpkins and their lack of spookiness this morning, because they're pumpkins. They're just pumpkins. Pumpkins. What's spooky about pumpkins? Etc., etc., etc.
Right. So she wants the spook factor.
Yeah, so if anyone has any suggestions for achieving peak spookiness with, hopefully, the house she was feeling inspired by had literally 12 to 15 of those inflatable light up characters in the front yard.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And while I'm fine with that in theory, A, I don't really want to buy them, and B, I don't really want to deal with how windy it is out here on the farm with those inflatables, and the fact that I know our dog will try to kill them.
Yeah, that's right. And there's not many people to see them. Not that's the, a requirement, but it does feel weird to decorate your house a whole lot for Halloween when there's not that many people coming by to appreciate the spookiness. Seems like more of a town home kind of situation.
Yes. Also, I'm seeing more and more about these permanent LED outdoor lights that are meant to be are actually designed to be left up all year. So they are, you can switch them from a color in the winter to white in the summer or whatever. So if anyone has experience with those, let me know, because I the same way that cold weather surprises me every year and the changing leaves surprise me every year, the desire to put up lights surprises me every year, but it always surprises me after it is gotten too cold to really enjoy doing anything like being out long enough to put up lights.
Yes. And now that your house is painted,
And now that our house is painted, we could just do it.
throw those suckers up there and you'd be good for years.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So, hit me with your good spooky ideas that are spookier than pumpkins, please, because my kid's not.
I feel like you could probably make a giant spider without like a ton of effort, stuff something in a black garbage bag and put some legs on it and attach it to your porch or something. That's somewhat spooky.
I was wondering, we have a lot of animal bones that come out of the compost.
That's authentically spooky. Just litter those around.
Yeah, but I was trying to come up with a way to make it more spooky and less eh, good creepy, not bad creepy. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yeah. I think you have to make some of those fake tombstones.
Yeah, maybe fake tombstones would take the real bones down a notch, but
Yes, yeah. Then they don't look like they're
yeah,
real.
that's a good idea. Okay, well,
All right, let's welcome our guest for this week.
that's a great idea.
Today we are talking to Katie Bonow, who's joining us from Minnesota. And Katie is a listener, so I don't have to go through my usual preamble. So she knows what our usual first question is. So, Katie, what are you growing?
I am from Southeast Minnesota, and my husband and I are currently growing 2 kids. We have a son who's 6.5 and a daughter who's 2.5. And I have a goat farm, so I have dairy goats and meat goats that I'm growing, as well as pasture for the rotational grazing. And then my business is selling goat cheese and meat, so I'm also growing a multitude of like microbiology in the cheese room. And my husband is also a dairy farmer, but he has dairy cows. So he has dairy cows, alfalfa, corn, beans, and rye. We've got a dog named Foxy and a handful of cats, a couple dozen chickens. And this year we have a really great garden that we're growing.
That is a lot of different things. So, in terms of scale, approximately how many goats are we talking about that you're milking and raising and all of those kinds of things?
It gets a little bit complicated because there's the meat goats and the dairy goats. Some of them get treated as both at the moment because there's not a very distinct line between the two. But to keep it a little simple, I kidded in about 60 female does this year, and I got just over 100 goat kids out of that. And I'm milking about 30 to 40 goats, depends upon the time of the year.
And so, goats are seasonal, right, in terms of their production cycle and reproductive cycle. Is that correct?
They are. Big commercial dairies, you'll find that they can stretch the seasons enough to make year-round milking work, but I choose to be very seasonal. So all of my goats kid in March and April. I start cheese making around June, and I go through October as much as I can.
And so, how many different kinds of cheeses or products are you making in your kitchen? So, your busiest time of year, you're milking and then like headed straight to the cheese room, or can you preserve some of that milk for a time? Or I'm asking a bunch of questions all at the same time, but I'm really interested in how you make all that work.
So you can freeze goat's milk or you can freeze curd, depending upon what type of cheese you're making. But I make a very specialized raw milk aged goat cheese. So for me, what works best is just to have this kind of marathon cheese making season where I'm very busy during the cheese year. And I make everything with as fresh a milk as I possibly can. And then when it's done, it's done. So I make cheese pretty religiously every other day throughout that entire season.
So, can you walk me through then, kind of on a cheese making day? What does your day look like? Like,
from waking to sleeping in your day?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 9 seasons now, so it's definitely changed over the years. And the biggest change has been how many times I milk and kind of my schedule. So what's been working when the goats are not in peak season is to actually cut down milking to either every 16 hours or every other day, or not every other day, sorry, every 16 hours or once a day. So on a cheese making day, I usually make cheese starting in the morning, stop for lunch, and then milk the goats and do what chores need to be done. And then on the off day, I do have to go into the cheese room and kind of finish up the cheese that got made the day before, put it into a cheese brine, and then I'll either milk twice that day, morning and night, or I will just milk once if I'm at that point in the lactation. So it's a lot of moving parts, and it's hard to like nail down one answer to a question because it changes throughout the season. It really does.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's right. So you mentioned that your husband is also a farmer, and so how many cows are we talking about on that side of the family farm?
Yeah, so we're on an 11-acre piece of land, and then him and his family farm about 4 miles down the road. There's a separate farm site, and they're a conventional dairy farm. They milk about 220, mostly Holsteins. I've got a sister-in-law who's on the farm as well, and she brought a few brown Swiss with her. So that's a nice little bit of color in the herd. And they do like 3 times a day milking. They've got a parlor suited for that. And it's my husband, his father, his brother, and then my sister-in-law. So my brother-in-law's wife. And then there's a few employees that mostly just do the milking.
So if you're drinking milk in your house, what kind is it?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, and I grew up on a dairy farm, and we would pull milk straight from the tank. And then when I got goats, we started drinking goat's milk. So I myself can switch over easily to whichever kind. My husband still hasn't quite acquired a taste for goat's milk. So for drinking milk, we'll typically either pull from both tanks, or he'll just forego the goat's milk during the milking season until it gets to winter. And then he's got cow's milk coming from his tank. However, I do make yogurt for the house, and cow's milk makes a much thicker yogurt much more easily. So we're always bringing cow's milk home for me to make yogurt.
So there's lots of different dairy.
Yeah. There's pretty much dairy everywhere all the time. We would really suffer if we were lactose intolerant or something.
I know for Dairy Month, I think maybe 2 years ago, I pulled out all of the dairy products in our fridge, even without having our own dairy animals. And maybe it's a Midwest/dairy family thing, but there is a substantial amount of dairy products in our home. So
I've heard that it's a Midwest thing to have like the separate cheese drawer in a fridge. I didn't realize that anybody put anything else in there.
yeah, ours, I think it's labeled as like a snack drawer or something. It is clearly a cheese and butter drawer. And I've been informed too that there are people who do not keep like 5 pounds of butter in the fridge at all times. I don't trust those people. I'm sorry, I don't. Like, it's weird to me. We ran out of butter once. It was horrific. Like, it was the most shocking thing that has happened to me in a long time. And that's saying something. So what is your ag background? And I want to be sure you tell us about how you got your first goat. Because this is I know I've met you several times at various area farm things, but this is the thing that has stuck with me. Because it seems like such a curse of a prize if you're not a goat person.
Yeah, it's a joke in the family that you should never accept a free goat because, for one thing, they're never free, really, and they cause a lot of problems.
That's good life advice right there.
Yeah, so I grew up in the very southeastern corner of Minnesota. It's a beautiful area. It's called the Driftless region, so there's lots of hills and valleys. My parents still have a very small dairy farm there. They milk 26 cows and sit on just 40 acres. So my dad also does fencing for other farmers. And my mom is just a fabulous, like, homemaker of all things. So she is great at growing an overabundance of fruits and veggies. And she's always busy, either doing farm work or just, she keeps herself very, very busy. So I grew up on a dairy farm, had a really great experience as a kid there. I distinctly remember being in about kindergarten, and my parents kept us home from school so that we could watch a cesarean section. So my parents like had us, there on the farm with them, experiencing all the things. When I was 12, I actually won a goat through a 4-H essay contest. And I had always been attracted to the goats at the fair. I'd always gone to the goat barn to hang out with them if I had the choice. And so I brought home my first goat, which was a Nubian called Blossom. And the deal with the essay is that you had to breed the goat and then provide a goat for the next person to win. So she had a boy, and we had to find a goat from somewhere else. But from Blossom has spawned this whole thing that's become my profession. And so throughout high school, I had goats. I milked them by hand. I had to milk goats in the morning before school, and then afterwards, even if I had sports or something, I had to come home and milk my goats and do other chores.
And so were you making cheese at that point, or what were you doing with the milk that you were getting from your goats back then?
Goats are super prolific, great reproductive success. So we soon had multiple goats in milk, and we couldn't just drink it all. So my mom wasn't going to let me waste any of it. And we had a couple neighbors who had been dabbling in some cheese making because they also had 4-H animals. So I got some recipes from them, got some help from my mom to get started on some super simple recipes. So by the time I was about 15, I think, I was making some simple cheeses in the kitchen.
So do you think if there was a most Minnesotan contest at the state fair, would your folks win, do you think? Like if there was a peak Minnesota contest.
Yeah, well, my mom's actually from Wisconsin, so I don't know if she'd be allowed to win.
Bringing in ringers from the other state.
Yeah. My dad's 100% Norwegian, 100% from Minnesota. So yeah, they're pretty darn Minnesotan.
Fair enough.
So in the years between a 15-year-old milking goats and making cheese in her mom's kitchen and where you are now, were you always on the path to being a farmer and making this your career, or were there other things that you considered in the in-between time?
I mean, in retrospect, it's pretty easy to see that all the footprints were leading to this. But at the time, it was a very authentic interest in what I was doing. And it's kind of fun to have that unfettered exploration of something that you find really fun, because there was no agenda to become a great cheesemaker or something. I just really enjoyed having the goats. There was this abundance of milk, and cheesemaking was at times a little bit of a burden because I was, 16 or 17, and I had gallons of milk in the fridge that I had to make into cheese. But once I got more and more into it, I really started to appreciate what cheese can be, and it's led me down some pretty cool paths. So it's been definitely worthwhile. There was one point where I thought I was going to be like a journalist or something, because I do really enjoy writing, but it was pretty clear that my personality wasn't going to fit other occupations very well. So definitely during college, I went to the U of M in the Twin Cities, which is a completely different environment than rural Minnesota. I was there and I was like, I'm so sick of living in a city. I need to go back home. I need to do something with my hands. And everything at that point really made it obvious that making cheese on a farm was going to make a lot of sense for me.
So what are some of the ways that you've developed your skills in all the different facets of your business? Because you're a cheesemaker, but you're also a farmer, and then you also have that marketing and sales side of selling those cheeses and making sure people that know about them. So where have you developed all of those different aspects of your career?
To keep on the vein of cheese making, I did a lot of just self-research and exploration at home. The internet wasn't what it is now when I was a kid. So there was a little information there, but mostly it was like getting books in the mail and doing hands-on experimentation to figure out how it worked. But then when I got to college, I discovered what's called the Vermont Institute for Artisan Cheese. And at that time, it was really new. It was doing coursework. I don't believe that they do anymore, which is a shame, because it was a fabulous 2-week course that you could go and do. It covered cheese chemistry and milk chemistry and food and safety and all the stuff you need to know as a foundation of being a good cheesemaker. And then I actually studied Italian studies in school. That's what my major was. And I got to study abroad as a junior. And I chose to go in January and finished my study abroad session and then stayed for the entire summer. So I actually woofed around Italy and worked on a few places that was doing farmstead cheese. So I got some really cool, like, hands-on experience on places that were doing something similar to what I'm doing. And I got to eat a ton of good food, a ton of good cheese. Totally like a life-changing moment to go do that. And then after that, it's really just been a lot of education coming from like things like the Vermont Council for Cheese does a conference every year. So I'll attend that virtually. There's getting to be more and more literature accessible to people to learn the nuances of making really good cheese.
Can you tell our listeners a little about what woofing is?
Woofing is the acronym for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, something along those lines. So there's a list that you can get access to by buying an ID card, and you get to communicate directly with a farm to see if they want your help. And then you go to the farm and work for room and board. So I would email the people that I was going to go stay with, and they'd pick you up at the train station, and they kind of put you to work where you have some skills or where you have interest and where they're comfortable letting you do some things. So I didn't always get to do like really hands-on, hands in the vat cheese making, but oftentimes I would do like cleaning up of the cheese forms and things like that. There's a lot of vegetable farms that seem to utilize woofers. I had really good experiences with it. Some people have kind of shady situations they get into, but like I think I did about a half a dozen different places, and they were all just fabulous to stay at.
Okay, so
I was just going to
no, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to continue on the vein of developing my skills in all the things that I have to do. So the agriculture part, taking care of the goats, has come a little easier because I have such a long background in farming. And honestly, on both sides of my family, there are farmers as far back as we can figure. So it's literally in my blood to be a farmer. There is a huge difference, though, from going from like a hobby farm size up to a more commercial operation. Milking 30 goats isn't all that big still, but the more animals you get, the more problems you run into. And then trying to make an operation actually cash flow and make you money is a whole nother level of work. Let's see, the sales and marketing piece has also been probably the most challenging thing for me as I started this business. To begin with, I utilized a distributor and essentially just like packed up my cheese, sent it to them, and then it was kind of up to them to do the selling. As things have changed over the years, I've gotten more comfortable taking on more of that sales and marketing piece. And then with the pandemic, the way that cheese gets sold kind of changed. And so I've had a slump after the pandemic that I'm having to shift things around and figure out how to do more direct-to-consumer sales to make this business work more for me.
So for folks, I know I'm just adding stuff in here now. For a lot of folks, goat cheese can be kind of a weird thing because if they don't know what good goat cheese tastes like, it's hard to tell if you're getting good goat cheese or bad goat cheese. How can folks sort of educate themselves, or I hate educate themselves because it sounds so like, but how can folks understand if they're just getting really shitty goat cheese? Because, you'll read descriptors that are like, this cheese is, you can taste the straw in it or whatever. And like, sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes that's basically saying it's going to taste like you just stuck your face in a bed pack. Like, yeah, how can people get around that bullshit and actually enjoy goat cheese? Because good goat cheese is really, really good. But I know a lot of people who won't eat it because they've had shitty goat cheese. It's like how people miscook lamb and then say they hate lamb. Like, it's not us, it's you.
Absolutely. And I've had some people be like, I had a hard time with with a piece of lamb one time, so I'm not going to try your goat cheese. I'm like, well, they're not the same thing at all. It's a real challenge for goat producers in the US because goat milk and cheese and meat is not a commonly consumed food product. So sampling is really the number one thing that I can do as a producer to give people an example of good cheese. And there's not really any other good way to know whether or not you're getting good cheese until you taste it. And that's part of what's changed with the pandemic is the labor shortage means that there are far fewer cheese counters that are fully staffed and far fewer people who actually have the background knowledge to cut and wrap and sell higher end artisan cheese. So the cheese counters have switched a lot to prepackaged cheese wedges and then not having somebody at the counter to do sampling. So it's part of the reason why I've really had to change how I do my sales and marketing. So for the average consumer, I would say try to go to a farmer's market and see if there's some goat cheese producers there. And there you should be able to like sample the product. I think a lot of the strong flavors come from mishandling the milk. And it's hard to know who's doing a good job and who's not until you actually taste the product.
So when you talk about making changes to your sales and marketing, what are you trying to do now to increase sales and get your cheese in front of more people?
So my distributor also went through being purchased by a very large company over the pandemic. And so I'm like this tiny drop in a huge bucket compared to when it was a boutique, like gourmet food distribution business prior. So my sales through the distributor have decreased dramatically, and I am putting in a lot more effort to do what's called email marketing and, cultivate an email list, really connect to people who are my end customer. And then I'm doing a little bit more shipping, but I'm really trying to focus on a local presence because I don't have so many goats that I don't think I need to do like a super national presence to be able to sell all of my cheese. I actually invested in a marketing course. Like, I'm not being paid to say this, but I am doing Charlotte Smith's 5X your farm sales, and it's been a super good program for me. I know a lot of farmers I've talked to about doing sales and marketing, like hardly any of them want to do it. We're mostly introverts. We mostly just want to like produce our product, have somebody take it away magically and sell it for us. But you give away so much of your money and your power when you do that. So it's been kind of fun to like actually learn how to do marketing well and take back control of my cheese sales a little bit more. And from what I've learned, like marketing is just building a relationship with people. And what it comes down to is being good at clear, concise communication and then being a really good listener.
You mentioned before about the fact that you're also raising goats for meat and that that's not a real common protein source for most people in North America. Where is that market going and how do you market your meat goats?
That is very much in its infancy. So I'm hoping to sell just a handful of goats direct to consumer. And I'll mostly be focusing on the consumers that I already have like on my email list. So I've got several people who are interested in whole goats. I also work with several chefs, and one of them is down, I think he's kind of close to you, Katie. He's down in Iowa. His name is Zach, and he's been doing a lot of farm to table meals. And so he's buying a goat to do like a whole goat roast sometime in September, I think. So working with restaurants and chefs who like kind of have a personality and connect with people just as a part of their job, working with people like that is a good way to market a product that's super new and tricky to sell to people. There again, too, they get to like sample it at a restaurant or at an event before they actually make a purchase.
Well, I think that's the issue with selling meat is that selling whole or half animals is so much more straightforward than selling by the cut. But you're potentially asking someone, if they can't sample it, you're asking them to buy, with a cow, several 100 pounds of meat with no idea what the quality is like. So I think anytime you can get it in front of a customer, and as much as I like the idea that companies will just like send random cheese samples in the mail, if anybody wants to mail me cheese, I'll get you my address. Feel free. But there's not a good way other than restaurants or full service counters. But with meat being raw is a whole other thing because, having done farmers markets with meat, you can't sample it really. The health inspector does not generally like that. It's not usually real attractive to put on display, especially in, like July. I don't want raw meat sitting out there. So, getting in with cooks who are passionate and who have that kind of following can be such a great opportunity to really put your product out there for folks without making the health inspector mad, which is, I think, basically the worst thing you can do as a direct to consumer. And I mean, God love the health inspectors. They don't get paid enough. They do a really good job. It is very, very important. Pissing them off is a big, big mistake. Huge, huge mistake. So I added some more questions in here. How do we know if people are goat people or if they're just wrong? And how do you, married to a cow farmer and as someone who's, I don't think my husband's home, but as someone who is married to someone who is not really a goat person, how do you maintain marital harmony in a mixed relationship like that? Because goats, especially, I know, we had goats and I said I was just going to build like a 12-foot fence down the middle of the pasture with like cinder blocks, razor wires, maybe some like, guards and towers, lights, the whole thing. And they would just spend all their time going back and forth over it instead of trying to put in perimeter fences because goats like a challenge. That's what I know about goats. And I feel like it takes a certain personality to not only put up with that, but to enjoy it and to find it desirable to have in your life. So I'm wondering how we can deal with these poor people who are just wrong in their opinions.
Yeah, so I really have found that there's either goat people or it's like the rest of the population. There's no in between whatsoever. Mostly you like offer people a goat cheese sample and their reaction to it will let you know whether or not they're a goat person. Because they'll either be willing to try it or they will just shut you down and be like, nope, don't want anything to do with them. My husband's brother actually had goats when he was a kid. And so my husband had a little bit of experience dealing with them on like a hobby farm level. It was not the most positive experience. So I guess my only the only way that I managed to make this a mixed marriage is that my husband wanted to marry me more than he cared about having goats.
That seems like some good premarital counseling right there. Like, how will he put up with adversity? Let's get some goats and find out. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, like you have to disclose beforehand in a marriage whether or not there's goats coming with you. And then good fencing. Good fencing is the only other thing. Like you try to keep the goats in as much as possible. And I'm dealing with the goats like 99% of the time, so I really try hard not to ask him to do a whole lot for me. He does have the big equipment, so I don't have to do any of like the skid loader driving or the tractor driving. He mostly cleans out my barns for me and things like that. But actually dealing with the animals on a day-to-day basis is me. The rest of the people, I don't know what to tell you. Like, good luck getting goats on your farm.
I feel like I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems like bigger goats are less trouble. Like my husband's cousin lives around the corner, has boar goats. They mostly seem to just hang out. I had Nigerian dwarf goats, which are like 2 feet tall, and you would find them on top of cars, like outside their fence, on top of cars, in buildings. Just, is there actually some sort of inverse relationship between how big a goat is and how, I don't want to say bad, challenging they can be personality-wise?
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. I've never had a Nigerian dwarf, but I'm pretty sure like the shorter they get, the more that they can jump over a fence.
I mean, I suppose they're heaving a lot less body weight up and over.
I don't know, they can get pretty chunky. They just like climb up the wall.
Yeah. Did you tell us what breed you have now?
So I started with that Nubian, and Nubians are also pretty notorious for being super loud and having obnoxious personalities. So, like, if you don't want a super loud goat, stay away from Nubians. But I actually crossbreed all of my animals. I am breeding for an ideal goat for me, which is pretty good production, good health and mothering traits, and then decent components. I don't need sky high fat. I do want pretty high protein though for making cheese. So I will crossbreed Nubians, Saanens. I've done some La Mancha, but their short little ears are pretty problematic for like putting ear tags in and stuff. So I won't breed to them again in the future. And then on the meat side, I am actually breeding my dairy goats, selecting the ones that are most meaty, breeding them to Boer and Kiko. And then I've got a neighbor with a Savannah goat, so I'll probably get some of those genetics in too. But I really appreciate the hybrid vigor of crossbred animals. They've been a good fit for my farm.
And if you're milking goats, your husband's milking cows, do you ever leave the farm? Or does it suit you not to leave the farm because you're a big bunch of Minnesotan introverts who are happier at home?
Yeah, you got me. The short answer is we don't really leave home. But we are introverted, we're homebodies, and my husband and I are both like equally into and intense about our farming and our business. And we're both kind of not quite at the same stage, but like we're both essentially at the beginning end of our farming journey. And like with kids, farming is a long-term investment. So we're hoping by the time our kids get a little bit older and are more pleasant to travel with, that we'll actually have some of the time and funds to do that.
Yeah, I think your little boy is the same age as mine, or very, very close. Because mine is also just about 6.5. So I think we're right in that same ages and stages. But they're getting there. But if you have a littler one, might still be a while.
Right. We try to do some like local close by things. So for example, last night we went to a family night on the farm. But by the time we get done with it, our kids are like nearly asleep in the car. It's bedtime. We're tired. We're ready to all just go to sleep. So we're really pretty satisfied with how things are. My husband does try to get away to Wisconsin, just over the river, at his friend's place to go hunting during the winter. And then with my seasonal schedule, I do take time in January and February to really go visit my family, who's about an hour away. So I'll stay for several days or up to a week. My goats are at a really easy point then where they really don't need much more than my husband just like looking at them to make sure they're alive and throwing some hay at them. So we make it work.
Check the gates, make sure all the latches are really latched. And
Make sure they're not tunneling out with spoons or, have little drawn up maps on the wall.
yeah, there's not a false wall somewhere. Yeah.
If any animal would do it, it would be goats. Like 100%.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard Language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage. So while we're talking about kids, one thing that we often end up asking, not just moms, but I mean, in particular moms, let's be honest, is talking about that transition from not being a parent to being a parent. And you said you've been actively milking goats for 9 years now. So that means that you were farming and having babies at the same time. So what was that like, especially when you had your first?
It's been kind of a wild ride. So I moved up to the place we're on now, and we gutted the barn, renovated it, got my business up and running. We got engaged, we got married. I was working a part-time job for that first year, and then we decided to have a kid right away. So I quit my off-farm job and just focused on the goats and being pregnant. Pregnancy was super rough for me for both of them because I would puke so much, and for like the whole pregnancy, it just felt like trash. So in a way, giving birth and like having an infant to take care of was almost easier because at least I had energy and I could eat.
You stopped throwing up.
Yeah. Thank goodness. So with my kids, I found the first like 2 years I'm doing like 90% of the childcare, and we've done exclusive breastfeeding, and my kids have just like not cared to eat very much until they were a full year old. So they're pretty much like on me in a carrier the entire time. And they're kind of easier at that point because they don't really have an opinion about things. They really just need to be, fed and changed and played with a little bit, but they're pretty content to just hang out with you. Once they get to be like 2, they get a little bit trickier because they're tornadoes and they try to help, which is so sweet, but they just spill feed everywhere, and that's the stage that I struggle with for sure the most. So my daughter, I've got different expectations for her because she's the second one. So it's been a little bit of a smoother transition, bringing her into the family and figuring out how she fits into the farming piece of things. But yeah, for the first 2 years, they're like with me all the time. With the cheese making, it gets a little tricky because like I have to be in the cheese room, but we're on our home place. I can look out the window and see them when they're playing. There's a lot of work that happens when they're napping. I would say with Oren, though, it was trickier because I just was so uncertain of myself and what I was doing. There were times when it was pretty rough and I thought I was going to have to quit because it was just too hard to do both. But we kind of suffered through, and my husband is so good at listening to me and realizing that I need to vent. So if I'm like having one of those days where I just want to quit and sell everything, he'll listen and he'll like take the deep breath for me that I need and be like, okay, let's slow down a little bit. Let's try to figure out this problem and make it better for you, and then see what you want to do tomorrow.
It's a really beneficial partner to have, to not always take you too seriously. Because if you have someone who gets right in that headspace with you, it's not always super helpful. So how does farm and family life work for you? Is Oren starting kindergarten this year? Or is he going to first grade?
He'll actually be in first grade. Yep. And he'll go to the public school here. It's
shocking that they're going to first grade. I don't know. First grade feels like real people. Yeah. And how has that changed? How's that working out for you?
Well, Lila's at that more challenging time because she's 2.5. So it's still going to be interesting as he goes to school, but I can see the future. Like I can see that it's going to be really nice to have them go to school and for me to really be able to concentrate on doing my work during the day so that I'm more available in the morning and the evening for them. Oren, unfortunately, does not really care to go to school. He is such a little farmer at heart. Like he just wants to be in a tractor with his dad. So it's a challenge every morning to kind of get him on the bus and get him going. But really, right now, we're in a pretty good season where between the two of the kids, they entertain themselves quite a bit. They're very independent when it comes to finding snacks in the cupboard. They've gotten pretty clever about like pushing chairs to strategic spots and climbing up and finding snacks where I've hidden them. I've come in the house to some pretty funny scenes. When my oldest was probably 3, he had poured himself a cup of maple syrup with filling a drop. Yeah.
Wow. Delicious.
So if you've got kids and you're on a farm, like you have to just either be better at hiding things than I am, or you really got to just laugh at it and roll with it, and your house is probably going to be a mess.
They're seriously like bloodhounds. Like, if any search and rescue teams are short some bloodhounds, they could borrow my kids. They'd be able to find it. Like, they can find anything except the remote and their shoes.
As long as the last person has a piece of chocolate in their pocket, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is pretty sugar-based, but maybe there's a call for that.
If you ask my kids, have you seen this item? Never. It's like they never knew that thing existed, but But yeah, something you don't want them to find, that's totally different.
Maybe I should tell them to never touch their shoes again and see if that would help. Don't you dare.
Yeah, that's right. You hide your shoes so I can't find them. So, Katie, do you have any farm-specific parenting advice that you would want to share with someone who's starting out or maybe in a similar life stage to yours? Are there things that you've learned along the way that you think might be helpful to somebody?
I've got so much advice. I've learned so much over 9 years.
Bring it on.
So I like one of the biggest things as far as like farming and having kids, the biggest thing I've learned is kind of two parts, but it's founded in, shutting the books about parenting, turning off social media, and really trusting your gut. Like you can take inspiration from people, but do not try to be picture perfect and the same as what you see, because you will just feel terrible about yourself that you can't do it the way they're doing it. And then what's come out of that for me is that my season as a cheesemaker and as a business owner looks very specific to me because it suits my needs. So I've really compartmentalized what I do in different seasons to make sure that I can focus on what I'm doing and be kind of efficient at that, and then move on to the next thing. And I'll have the time to do that because I'm not doing the other thing. So like in January and February, I'm doing bookkeeping. I do household projects. I visit people. March, April, and May are all about kidding season and taking care of the goats. And then, June through October is the marathon of cheese making. And I just know that I don't have time to do so much during that season. And then we get into like November and December, which is kind of recovering from cheese making season, but then it's also like hardcore cheese sales season because it's the holidays. So in about 6 weeks, I do a third of my sales probably. So it's like cutting and wrapping to prepare for that, and then doing those cheese sales. So for me, that's been really helpful to just forget about the fact that I'm supposed to milk 2 times a day, every single day, and be a year-round dairy and get up at 2:00 in the morning so I can do everything before my kids get up. Like it's just not realistic for me. So I have to really turn off the internal judgment and be like, it is okay that I wake up at 6:00 in the morning and I don't make it outside until like 9, and I get all of my work done and we eat supper at like 6 or 7 o'clock, and that's an okay schedule for us. So that's what we're going to do. The other thing that I feel really passionate about as a parent and as a farmer is you got to take care of yourself. So like try to get enough sleep and then really try to feed yourself well. So like food planning and things like that. I love it because I love food, but it's been a challenge. Like I always felt like supper was supposed to happen at the same time as bedtime. And it was also my chore time at night. Plus everybody's like hangry and crabby and ready to go to bed. So I really try to get my meats prepared beforehand. So then when it comes time to like make supper, I have it written down because I meal plan, but it's also like such a short amount of time to get supper ready if your meat is already like cooked and shredded and ready to go.
Those are a lot of really good tips. What is your favorite thing about raising kids on the farm?
It was actually really fun to talk to my husband about that this morning. I asked him a few of these questions, and on this one, like you could just see his eyes light up as much as the kids do, because we both love watching our kids get excited about what they're doing every day and having those experiences it's so unique to a farm. So like goat kidding season is so cool because they adore the baby goats, and they also get to see the goat kids being born. I do a lot of Instagram during kidding season because people love it. And people have pointed out to me that my kids are like in the background watching. And I like didn't even see them doing that, but they're watching the goat give birth along with everybody else. And then I love that there's like no filter too between what's happening in real life and what the kids are experiencing. It's so unique to farming, and we just get to spend so much time with them too, even if we're working at the same time.
Yeah, we've talked before about the way that farm kids have a unique perspective on what it is that their parents actually do because you can see it, right? What it is that we as farmers are doing is obvious to them, right? It's not hidden. I mean, some of it's hidden in a computer, the bookwork side and the business side, but the actual physical work of our jobs is so much more obvious to them than for so many other careers.
100% can confirm as someone who works from home on the computer. Daddy apparently has a real job because they can go up to the mill where he works and see what he does. But as far as they're concerned, I probably just watch YouTube all day or something. They don't know, but they're pretty sure I'm not actually working. Katie, what's your biggest parenting struggle?
I actually do have notes. I'm looking. I was like, I know this is going to be a good conversation for me, at least, because I've got 5 pages of notes.
Oh, she's got notes. I love it.
My husband jokes about how much of a chatty Cathy I am. I'm very good at talking. I think right now just getting our son on the bus to school is probably the biggest thing. And the fact that my 2.5-year-old is an absolute tornado. Like, I'm not a good housekeeper, but our house is some days unmanageable even for me. She just tears into things.
Yeah. And is she the kind of kid who then wants to follow him on the bus, even though he's resisting? Then she's like, oh, then I'll go instead. School sounds fun. Or are you dealing with two similar situations in the morning?
I'm not sure. She does often feed on his mood. Last year she was younger, so she was pretty good at just like waving to the bus. She was all right watching him go. But this year I do think she's really big into her pack, as she calls it. She puts random stuff in it and then she goes around the farm with it. So I think this year it's going to be her wanting to get on the bus and him being like, that's fine, I'll stay home.
Yeah, that's right. We can swap places.
Mm-hmm.
You're good.
And he always like needs a break from her too, because they squabble because they're siblings. And he's like, oh, I just need a break from her. So he'd be totally fine with her going to school.
Yeah. Even if you use that as your ploy, well, the best way to get a break from your sister is to go to school. But then there's other people there. So for a little farmer introvert, that doesn't always work out.
I'm going to use that now. I'm going to be like, if you want away from your sister, you get on that bus. When I told my husband what this podcast was about, he's like, oh, so you're going to tell them to just find a tractor and put your kid into it. Like, yeah, it's the best babysitting that there is. So once they hit like 2.5, they can handle being in a tractor for a while. So all of the tractors, whenever it's chopping season or any sort of, event where there's multiple tractors in the field, there's a kid in almost every single one. Other than that, I think they listen so much to what we're talking about. And my son does try to interject his opinion into the conversation a lot now. He's getting to that point. But they just get to hear about the struggles that we're going through or the good times. And they pretty much get an unfiltered lesson in what it's like to run a farm. Because we talk about farming so much at the kitchen table and elsewhere. So they really get immersed in it that way. I have found that they're not really actually very helpful. My son's getting to the point where he can be. So I'll let him wash his hands, and when I'm packaging cheese, he gets to press one of the buttons and do the vacuum packaging. But he can only do it for 10 times and then he gets bored. But he does come in and sample cheese pretty frequently. He's good at that. He's very good at that.
It's a good skill. Quality control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll figure out more and more ways to incorporate them as far as chores. That will be a priority for us to figure out where they can do some things that work for them. But one of the things that my husband and I have talked about too is that with his big farm, he's not going to have the same chores to offer to the kids as what we grew up doing, which was very manual, hands-on, in some ways a lot safer than what's going on a bigger farm. So the goat farm is going to be a little bit easier to incorporate them into. Goats are just safer to be around for kids. And the way that I do things is smaller and more manual. So I'm sure that there will be plenty of poop scooping and feeding of kids and stuff like that to do for them.
And physically smaller animals too. You know, like the difference between a cow and a goat is pretty significant, especially when you're 4 feet tall.
The poop difference, both volume and cohesiveness wise, is also greatly more pleasant with goats than with cattle.
But then there's the goat smell, right? People always talk about the smell of goats. So that's a factor.
That's what I was just going to say. Their poop, like I'm overcrowded right now in my barn. I get more shed space later this year, but like you crowd that many goats into a barn and they trample it with their little feet, and it's so packed, and the ammonia smell is so strong. It's so bad. But I think the smell you're referring to mostly is the bucks, and we are getting really close to breeding season, so pretty soon my farm's going to smell pretty bad. And the goat bucks, they actually pee on themselves, and that smells terrible. And they have like scent glands that release this like oily, smelly substance. They get super gross. I've kind of gotten used to it, but my husband will comment sometimes when I come in the barn. He's like, you need to change your clothes and take a shower.
Any particular laundry tips for goat laundry or goat smelling laundry, or you just have to hit it with the hot water?
Yeah, it just mostly comes out with hot water.
Say I had blocked out some memories of transporting a buck rag for somebody, which is a delightful. I mean, you have your own bucks, so maybe you don't do this, but I'm sure you've experienced it. Bringing a rag scented like bucks to help bring does into heat. I'm not even sure why. But from one friend to another friend, and even with it triple bagged in Ziploc bags, it was something. It was something. We'll put it that way.
Yep. I love how like goat bucks and their smell has this whole like mythology around it, and it creates some really great stories. So the buck rag, you're right. It carries the scent of the buck. You like rub it on all their grossest parts, and then double bag it, bring it to the doe that you want to come and heat. You let her smell it and like rub her face in it and stuff like that. That helps bring on her cycle. But I've had people like borrow my bucks to breed one goat. And the funniest situation I've ever seen was we smushed like a full-size, smelly alpine buck into the back seat of a small car. And then when they brought the goat back, this gal she worked at the local food co-op. And so she got like veggie scraps. So she's like sitting in the back seat, cradling this large buck and feeding him organic vegetable scraps. It was the funniest thing ever.
I'm just picturing how you'd ever get that smell out of your car. I mean, I'm not an easily squicked person, but whoa.
She had like a couple towels down, but I don't think that cuts it.
I think I would find the smell of bucks easier to deal with if they didn't seem so proud of it. They're so into it. And it's just a whole thing. Anyway.
I mean, there's so much crossover between bucks and young men. Like, it is totally the same situation as teenagers, like, masking themselves in the Axe body spray and, like, having this coiffed hair. And, like, they've got the same personality. It's the same thing going on.
That's true. Bucks during season are a lot like young men at the county fair, aren't they? Like, you can smell them from a long ways away. There's a lot of swaggering. There's a lot of hair. And a certain set of ladies really likes it.
Yeah, the girls are all over in that area looking at them.
It's 100%.
Not really sure. Should we approach or not? I don't know. Maybe we'll just stay away.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny time on the farm to watch the interaction between the buck, especially when he first gets put in. Because the goats aren't usually, not all of them are like cycling at that particular moment. So they either fight him, they run away, they flirt with him. Like, it's a whole show. It's great.
That's when the Instagram reels need to come out. Goat behavior.
There should be a website called Only Farms that would just like post these reels that are really not safe for people with delicate sensibilities, because
Or they get screened by Instagram somehow.
Yep, there's times when I'm trying to record something for Instagram and I'm like, I feel a little uncomfortable about this moment. Like, I don't think I can put this on. I think it gives the people a wrong impression about why I'm watching what's going on.
Okay, so speaking of fairs, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be?
So I have real life experience with this because I was in 4-H. And I did win the food and nutrition project one year because I brought cheese instead of like the cookies that everybody else brings. So I like brought a wheel of cheddar cheese that I had made that summer, and the judges were like, "Oh yeah, this is pretty good." And then I would often win like the potato grand champion for some reason. And I did occasionally win the goat show, and I would show dairy cows too. So I never won that whole show, but we would place pretty good quite frequently. But now I think if I had to make up some categories, my 2 categories I'd beat everybody out of the water in would be being late and talking for way too long. I'm good at those 2 things.
Sometimes one leads to the other, I'm guessing.
Always. The 10-minute long, no, like hour-long Minnesota goodbye is a real thing.
I love it. So we'll go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing, which is just another opportunity to talk some more. If you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can go to our SpeakPipe or to our email. Both of those are in the show notes, and we will either play your voice memo or read it out for you. Katie, what do you have to cuss or discuss this week?
Kids' opinions. My kids are at that age where they have opinions about everything, which is fine. But they don't always have the skills to communicate them or to even know what it is they want. They just know they don't want the thing they have or the thing they're being offered.
They don't come up with alternatives.
No. And right now I got my son a kind of underwear that he does not like, which is fine. We can get him different undies. It's not a big deal. But he doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't have any words to describe what he wants. He's not going to go shopping. Underwear aren't really something you can try on. I mean, I guess you could, but
right. So you're just going to have to keep buying new ones until you find the right ones. And he doesn't want to try them on even once they get home, I bet. It's like when you're getting ready for school in the morning that then the freak out happens. Is that what I'm picturing?
Yes, you are absolutely correct. But he doesn't have any way to tell me what he wants. It's just not this. And I assume that because we're a parenting podcast, most of our listeners have had to do things like buying socks and underwear for children who need them, have opinions about them, but cannot tell you what is desirable or undesirable. And it's possibly the only thing that I find more frustrating than when my child insists that they have a cut, but I can't see it, and then they just wave their hand in front of my face and go, "There!" Cool, okay.
Put on your own Band-Aid, then I'll be able to see where it is.
Yeah, here you go, kid. I just... and I know how irritating it is to have socks and undies that don't fit right. Like, I absolutely get it. But I also can't help you if you don't know what you want.
With my son, it's his pants because
Anyway.
he's got like this skinny little butt and nothing fits him. So we have to literally try on every pair.
Is it just all overalls all the time at your house like it is here?
Oh no, he would hate overalls. He couldn't handle those. He's also got the opinions. Yep.
Yeah, and then you go through a summer season and think, okay, we've got a few pair of pants that fit, but you haven't worn them in a few months, and none of those are going to fit anywhere.
Yes.
So just start over looking for new skinny butt pants.
Yep.
I feel like 2 6-year-old farm boys might be in a special category of opinion because, like you said, that they listen to their parents have opinions and discuss opinions all the time. When you're farming together, and so I think they get real used to having opinions on everything and expecting that it is always a good time to share that opinion on whatever they're opinionating about. Anyway. So if anyone needs me this weekend, I'll be buying more underwear for my kid.
Maybe Amazon has like a multi-pack of different styles and you can just pick them.
That's a good idea.
That's what they should do. When they had like, I feel like when the kids were first born, it was a thing to get like multi-packs of pacifiers or bottle nipples or whatever that were kind of like, try these and see what your kid likes. They should do that with socks and undies too. Just like one of each and you can try it on. I'm gonna add this to my business plan along with, in case anyone from Premier One Fencing hears this, Electronet for children. I mean, like a super, super low, not like a 3-mile fencer situation, but if you've used Electronet with livestock, it can be real efficient. And I just feel like it would be mean to set up something that was clearly actually Electronet for your children, but I don't think it's a bad concept. That's all I'm saying. I think the concept is solid.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to market that one, Katie. I get where you're going, but I feel like the public
Even I think that a 3-mile fencer for your child is probably a bad idea.
So Katie with a K, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
A lot of things, but the one that I will choose for today is the combination of hot summer weather and flies that never went away because we had such a warm winter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's been bad this year. And they're like the heel biting flies, so they bite my legs, even if I've got long socks on or something. Like they just are vicious. And I don't do a lot of spraying or anything, but the methods I have tried have been futile. Like they just haven't made a dent in the fly population. So I'm really looking forward to that first frost when those flies get killed and knocked back. I'll be a happy camper after that.
There's something about a biting fly too, because it's like you were hardly even on my skin long enough, and yet you got a bite in, right? Like at least with a mosquito, they have to like attach and then you can kill them, but the fly just like bites and goes. It's like you hardly even knew they were there.
Well, and mosquitoes buzz. Like you get some warning. And like gnats are irritating, but they don't really bite. But like those biting flies, we've had them this year too, and we don't normally have that many of them. And their bites hurt, and they're quiet, stealthy. I don't like it. It's not fair.
Mm-hmm. And they outnumber us so much.
Plus fly spots on everything. Ugh.
Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
Mine is extra fees on stuff. I went to purchase a thing the other day and I thought I knew how much it was going to cost. And I'm in Canada, so there's tax on everything, which is fine. I mean, I know it goes to good things, healthcare, all that stuff. So there's tax on everything. We usually have to pay shipping on everything because there's like no free shipping because I don't know why. But then it's all the extra fee, like convenience fees and credit card fees. And I was looking at my daughter's university tuition bill the other day, and just the list of extra fees on that is insane. And they keep having referendums within the student body to be like, yes, we think this is a good cause, we're going to contribute, like 30 cents from each student to this particular organization or that particular organization. But then over the years they just keep adding more and more and more, and then you have this huge list of fees in the end that sure probably all goes to good things, but it just adds up like crazy. So yeah, surprise fees. Just tell me what it's going to cost.
I get why they want to disclose these fees. Like, I get that that's a thing. But maybe put them in the fine print on the back and just show me the number and just pretend that that's just the price. Because I feel like seeing that it's fees is offensive to my mind. Like, I don't mind the total.
Yeah, put it in the terms and conditions that I'm not going to read anyway. Throw it in there.
I don't want to know that you're charging me for 911 access. Like, just charge me for it. It's fine.
Yeah, I can't opt out. So just, put it in the price. So, Katie, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find out more about your farm, watch some kidding videos, buy some cheese, where should they find you online?
You can find me by searching for Capra Nera Creamery. And that's spelled CAPRANERA Creamery. So that's like my handle on Instagram, Facebook, and then I've got a website as well. I do have an email list, as I mentioned. So if you sign up for the email list, you get to know more like when I'm doing like cheese drop-offs or have shipping available and things like that. It's still a work in progress, but that's the easiest way to know that you're getting the most current information. And I do ship cheese. I don't to you, Arlene, in Canada. I don't know how that works. I thought about shipping cheese to you, Katie, before this podcast, but I was like, that's really unfair to Arlene, so I didn't. I do ship cheese, and then locally at like places in Rochester, Winona, Spring Grove, where I'm from, those are places that I sell cheese to either in restaurants or retail locations, and then a couple of places up in the Twin Cities area.
Very cool. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been fun to be on this side of the microphone. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.